You think the most catastrophic extinction on Earth was the one that killed the dinosaurs? Wrong. That one only ranks 5th. The real number 1 wiped out over 90% of all species. Almost everything in the oceans and on land died. You think the culprit was an asteroid? Wrong again. This time nothing fell from the sky. The thing that killed almost all life on Earth was the Earth itself. It tore open a wound from within. Lava covered more than 7 million square kilometers of land. Toxic gases erupted for millions of years. The oceans were boiled into oxygen-depleted waters. Acid rain fell from the sky. Hydrogen sulfide filled the atmosphere. One breath would burn your lungs through. You think the survivors were the strongest? Completely wrong. The dominant land creatures of the age were wiped out entirely. Instead, the smallest and most unremarkable ones survived. Those hiding in burrows underground. They endured this hell. And what's even more chilling is that after this extinction, Earth needed at least 5 million years just to rebuild a basic ecosystem. Some researchers even believe full recovery took 30 million years. The entire planet was left like it had been formatted and empty. To understand this extinction, you first have to see the world before it happened. That era was just as extreme as the extinction itself. Today we continue the explanation, Earth's deep history. Episode 9, the Permian. Back then, Earth did something almost unimaginable today. It pushed all of its land together. 290 million years ago, Asia, Africa, the Americas, Antarctica, and Europe slowly drifted together like 5 magnetic pieces. Eventually, they fused into a single supercontinent. Scientists call it Pangaea. How big was it? Almost all land on Earth was packed into it, about 1/3 of the planet's surface. If you open a world map and push all continents together until they fit, that's what it looked like. Sounds cool, right? But this was the beginning of the nightmare. When all land is packed together, the center is extremely far from the ocean. Moisture can't penetrate inland. A massive mountain range also rose through the middle of the continent, like a wall across the equator, blocking humid air currents from north and south. As a result, the center of Pangaea became a giant desert, several times larger than today's Sahara. How hot was it? If a lizard stayed still on the ground, it could be cooked alive in just a few minutes. Rainfall was extremely scarce. Most rivers were seasonal, flooding briefly during storms, then drying up and cracking within days. Plants couldn't survive. Animals had it even worse. All life was forced into a few habitable pockets. The most crowded area was in the north, near the ancient Tethys Ocean, around what is now Russia and Siberia. The climate was relatively cooler and water was barely sufficient. But don't think it was safe. When all life is compressed into one region, competition stops being competition. It becomes slaughter. This region became the most concentrated hunting ground for the apex predators of the late Permian, and the top of the food chain was not dinosaurs. Dinosaurs didn't even exist yet. The real rulers were creatures most people have never heard of, therapsids. Some might think they were lizards, but they weren't. They were strange ancient beings between reptiles and mammals. In other words, if you trace back far enough, your ancestors, cats, dogs, tigers, elephants, and even humans, share distant roots with them. But don't get too comfortable with that idea. The most fearsome of them was a creature called Inostrancevia. Its fossils were first discovered in Russia, later also in South Africa. It measured 3 to 4 meters long, with the largest reaching nearly 4.5 meters, about the size of a polar bear. But its skull alone was about 45 centimeters long. When it opened its mouth, the angle was terrifying. Inside were 2 rows of saber-like teeth. The canine teeth alone could reach 12 to 15 centimeters. Imagine a polar bear-sized predator rushing straight at you with dagger-like teeth in its mouth. That image alone is enough to ruin your sleep for a week. But its size wasn't the scariest part, its hunting method was. Unlike modern big cats that aim for a quick killing bite, Inostrancevia had a more primitive, cruel strategy. It would rush in, bite violently, tear a huge wound, then step back and simply watch. Watch you bleed, watch you shake, watch you slowly collapse, and if you weren't dead yet, it would come back for another bite. Fossils even show evidence of one Inostrancevia being bitten deeply by another of its own kind and surviving. Even social interaction among them involved biting. That tells you how brutal they were, but land land wasn't the only danger. If you think escaping to water would save you, you'd be wrong, because in rivers and swamps lived something even more terrifying, a giant amphibian known as Prionosuchus. It wasn't a crocodile or a lizard, it was an amphibian, but on a completely different scale. It could reach over 5 meters, possibly up to 9 meters, making it the largest amphibian in Earth's history. Its long, narrow head was filled with rows of inward curving teeth. It lay motionless on the riverbed like a log. From the shore, you wouldn't see it at all, just a calm river. You bend down to drink water, and it's already too late. Its jaws snap shut in an instant. Those teeth weren't for slicing, they were for locking prey in place. The more you struggle, the deeper they dig. Land meant death, water meant death. That was the Permian, an era where even escape was a luxury. But the real horror is this: those dominant creatures ruled for tens of millions of years, and then suddenly disappeared. Not defeated by rivals, but wiped out by the Earth itself. Around 252 million years ago, something happened deep underground in the north. A massive mantle plume began rising. You can think of it as an ultra-hot stream of molten rock from deep inside Earth's core, with temperatures above 1,500 degrees Celsius. It pushed upward for thousands of kilometers until it broke through the crust. But this wasn't a normal volcanic eruption. No explosion, no fireball, no quick event. This was something 1,000 times worse. Silent, invisible, a lie of the crust stretching for thousands of kilometers. Instead of erupting from a single volcano, lava poured out like a flood through cracks in the earth, covering over 7 million square kilometers. Imagine the entire continent of Australia being covered in molten rock. In some places, basalt layers reached over 3,000 meters thick, higher than 10 Eiffel Towers stacked up. And this didn't last days or months. It continued intermittently for over 1 million years. This is known as the Siberian Traps. But the lava itself wasn't the deadliest part. The real killer was the chain reaction it triggered. First, enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide entered the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide combined with water vapor to form sulfuric acid, falling as acid rain. Plants died in massive waves. The food chain collapsed from the bottom up. Next, CO2 levels skyrocketed, triggering runaway global warming. Average temperatures rose by at least 10 degrees Celsius in a short geological time. Oceans warmed to nearly 40 degrees Celsius, turning into a giant hot sub. Marine life collapsed. Trilobites, ancient survivors for nearly 300 million years, went extinct. Then came the third and deadliest phase, oxygen depletion in the oceans. Sulfur bacteria thrived in the deep sea, producing hydrogen sulfide, highly toxic. The oceans turned green and purple as decay spread. Hydrogen sulfide escaped into the air. At low concentrations, it smells like rotten eggs. At higher concentrations, you stop even smelling it because it paralyzes your sense of smell. At even higher levels, it burns your lungs on contact. At the same time, volcanic gases damage the ozone layer, allowing ultraviolet radiation to strike the surface directly. Recent studies suggest it wasn't just Siberia. Volcanic activity in South China also released massive sulfur emissions and heavy metals, creating alternating phases of global cooling and rapid warming. This combination was far more deadly than gradual climate change. In other words, the end Permian extinction wasn't caused by one killer. At least two forces acted together, one in the north, one in the south, striking simultaneously, and the deaths didn't happen all at once. They moved like dominoes from the poles toward the equator. By the time it reached the tropics, everything was already collapsing. The dominant predators were erased completely. Their teeth, armor, and strength meant nothing in acidic air and boiling oceans. Earth's most refined killing machines, gone. And then comes the most shocking part. The survivors were not the strongest, not the largest, not the most heavily armed. They were small, pig-like creatures called Lystrosaurus, about 0.5 meter to 1 meter long, with simple tusks and no special weapons. But they had one advantage: survival ability in underground burrows. When the surface became hell, they hid underground, surviving on limited oxygen and stable temperatures. After the extinction, they became the most common land vertebrates of the early Triassic. A tiny, insignificant animal inherited the entire planet. Final numbers: over 80% of marine species and about 90% of land species disappeared. Scientists call it the Great Dying, the most severe extinction in Earth's 4.6 billion year history, and the peak of destruction may have lasted less than 60,000 years. From a thriving planet to a burning wasteland, recovery took at least 5 million years, some say up to 30 million. Destruction takes moments in geological terms. Rebuilding takes hundreds of times longer, but life returned. From burrows, cracks, deep oceans, and darkness. Small, insignificant survivors persisted, and you carry their legacy in your own cells. You exist not because your ancestors were the strongest, but because they were small, weak, and overlooked enough to survive. The extinction cleared almost every ecological niche, and new ones opened. Small reptiles began to rise. And around 237 million years ago, during the Carnian stage of the Triassic, something new emerged. A name you definitely know: dinosaurs. At first, they were tiny, weak, unremarkable, so how did they take over the world? That's for the next episode.